thrift store treasures. It was Saturday morning. Mary walked out of her house with $20 in her pocket and a spirit full of optimism. She had spent the previous night in front of her television set watching a reality show that followed lucky people who had found amazing things at their local thrift shops. All of these people had bought seemingly ordinary items for extremely low prices and ended up discovering that their items were actually very valuable treasures. After having spent 5 consecutive hours watching other people's experiences, Mary was determined to give bargain hunting a try in hopes of finding something that would make her rich. One of her favorite stories from the show was of a man who had purchased a copy of the Declaration of Independence thinking that it was a cheap replica for only $2. He ended up discovering that the print was actually one of only 200 official copies of the Declaration of Independence commissioned by John Quincy Adams in 1820. The man ended up making $477,650 after selling it. As Mary walked into her local thrift shop, she tried recalling what all the people in the reality show had looked for. The most common items that people got rich from were paintings, and so she headed straight to the home decorations aisle. Once there, she couldn't decide which looked most expensive. They actually all seemed pretty ugly to her. "Excuse me," Mary said to an elderly woman walking by. "Which painting do you think could make me richer?" Confused, the old lady quickly pointed at one and walked away. The painting the old lady had pointed at was of a cat collage, with almost 20 different cat faces jumbled atop of one another. Definitely not my first choice, thought Mary. However, she trusted Destiny's decision and bought the painting for $5. After putting it up online, she began receiving dozens of emails asking if the picture frame displayed came with the painting. In order to see what all the buzz about the frame was about, she took it to an antique store and asked if there was anything special about the frame. "Of course, it is special," remarked the clerk at the store. "Its wood and age make it at least $25,000. A few days later, the buyer returned the ugly painting to her through the mail. The unlikely reunion on December 26, 2004. A 10-minute-long earthquake with a 9.3 magnitude occurred in the Indian Ocean. This massive earthquake, which is the 3rd strongest ever recorded in history, triggered various powerful tsunamis that reached over a dozen countries' shores. Nearly 230,000 people were killed by the catastrophe, and hundreds of thousands of others ended up injured or missing. In the midst of all the devastation caused by this disaster, many amazing and inspiring survival stories have emerged. One of the most extraordinary of these is the story of a young girl named Wadi. The tsunami struck her hometown of Asa when she was only 8 years old. Like so many others, the powerful waves separated her from her family, and she ended up being washed into an unknown town. After many years of searching for her, her family gave up and assumed she had died after being swept away miraculously. Wadi was returned to her parents 7 years later at the age of 15. According to Wadi, she had been adopted by a stranger who found her on the streets after the tsunami. Although the woman took her in to live with her, she forced Wadi to beg on the streets and would often beat her if she did not make enough money. The girl had tried to find her family by asking for help from strangers, but did not remember the names of her parents and could only vaguely remember that she had a grandfather named Abraham. Finally, one day, a cab driver who heard Wadi's story happened to know an old man with that name in a nearby town and decided to take her to him, although the old man did not recognize her at first. He took Wadi to see his daughter. "When I saw my mother, I knew it was her," said the 15-year-old. "I just knew." The parents were able to confirm that it really was their daughter based on a scar and birthmark on the girl's hip. This miraculous story is unfortunately one of the only confirmed reunions among families that were separated by the disaster. The lottery ticket, an 85-year-old woman in Tennessee named Astrid, became a multimillionaire overnight after winning a $500 million lottery jackpot. However, her road to richness was not all completely smooth. Her story reminds us that in order to win the Lottery, there are two crucial requirements. The first and most obvious necessity is a lot of luck. The second requirement is just as important, but much less often mentioned, getting organized. Astrid's story began when getting in line for a lottery ticket at her local supermarket. The woman ahead of her decided to let her cut in front of her to pay. This woman was also planning on buying a lottery ticket. Had she not given Astrid her spot in the line, the lottery money would have been hers. On the day that the winners were announced, Astrid realized she had won. She could not contain her excitement. She danced with joy all around her house and jumped on the phone to tell her closest relatives. What had just happened? The next morning, Astrid woke up and prepared to go claim her prize money, but suddenly realized that she could not remember where she had placed her ticket. Given that her memory was no longer as sharp as it used to be, she searched and searched around her messy house for hours to no avail. She had absolutely no recollection of where she might have stored or dropped the ticket. Astrid had been given 30 days to claim her prize, or else it would be canceled. For 27 days, her schedule was dedicated to searching every surface and square foot of her house for the missing ticket. With only 3 days left, she decided to finally call her daughters for help. She had been too embarrassed to call them from the beginning because her house was so messy, but now had no other choice. Figuring that helping their mother find the ticket would probably secure at least an extra $1 million to them, all 3 of Astrid's daughters immediately sped over to her house. Within the first half hour of searching, the youngest of her daughters hollered, "I found it." It turned out Astrid had left it in a dish cabinet. "Oh, thank you, daughter," Astrid cried. "I owe you so much." Her daughter's smile glistened with pride as her two sisters scowled at her from the next room. Finding your own apartment, Julie was tired of living with her parents. She was 22 and just finished college. She started a new job in an office and didn't want her parents to tell her what to do anymore, so Julie decided to start looking for an apartment. She started by looking at classified ads in the newspaper and checking on websites like Craigslist. The first apartment she went to see sounded perfect on the newspaper. It was advertised as a cozy 1-bedroom apartment with a view. She made an appointment to view the apartment. When the landlord opened the door, Julie was sorely disappointed. The cozy bedroom barely fit a twin mattress and a nightstand. The window actually offered a view of a brick wall. Julie didn't give up hope, though. The next apartment she saw was advertised as having a renovated kitchen, since Julie loved to cook. She imagined herself cooking gourmet meals on shiny new kitchen appliances. However, the broker showing Julie around explained that the only renovations were new knobs on old wooden cabinets. Julie was beginning to lose hope. She then saw a listing for a basement apartment with access to a low-maintenance yard. Julie imagined herself hosting barbecues for her friends, until she saw that the low-maintenance yard was a tiny slab on concrete. Julie decided to stop looking for apartments that had features she liked. Instead, she was going to look for an apartment close to her job. She read a listing for a studio that was close to a freeway. This meant a shorter commute. When she saw the place, she found that the studio actually overlooked the freeway, and traffic could be heard from the bedroom. Julie was discouraged. She decided not to move out yet, leaving a tip. Sharon and Ken just finished a wonderful meal at a fancy restaurant. The service and food were 5-star quality. Ken asked for the check. "How much is the tip?" Sharon asked. Since she and Ken were just friends, she didn't want him to pay for the whole meal, but since Ken did invite her, she assumed he was paying. Sharon thought that offering to put in the tip was a nice gesture. The tip was not going to be cheap. The meal, complete with a bottle of wine, must have been at least $200. $30 would be 15% of a $200 bill, and $40 would be 20% of a $200 check. Since the service was good, Sharon had no problem giving a 20% tip. Ken told Sharon that there was no need to leave a tip. Sharon was shocked. Maybe Ken didn't think the food was good, or maybe he wasn't happy with the service. This surprised Sharon because Ken seemed to enjoy the entire experience and didn't complain. Was something wrong? Sharon asked Ken. No, Ken answered. He explained that he felt tipping was just an American way of showing off extra wealth. I think it's vulgar and disrespectful, he continued. Sharon knew that Ken wasn't born in the United States and wondered if that had something to do with how Ken felt, well, in the United States. Tipping is kind of expected. Servers generally aren't paid that well and rely on tips to feed their families. The exception, of course, is if the service was really bad, but I had a lovely time, didn't you? Sharon asked. Service was great, Ken agreed. But why didn't they just pay the servers better so we don't have to pay more? Sharon agreed with Ken, but she still left a 20% tip. Come over anytime. But not really. Patricia was happy that she was finally making friends since moving to Los Angeles from New York. She had left everything behind to move to be closer to her boyfriend. The first friend she made was Helen. Helen worked with Patricia at a clothing store in the local shopping mall. Sometimes Patricia would even see Helen on the freeway when they were working the same shift. Patricia thought that they must not live too far from one another. Helen confirmed this. My neighborhood is right next to yours, Helen told Patricia while they were both checking out. Customers. Drop by anytime you want on a day when we're both not working, Helen said. Patricia took the invitation to literally. She was able to get Helen's address from their manager at work. I want to surprise my new friend, Patricia told the manager. The manager thought that was sweet, and without thinking about Helen's privacy, he passed the address on to Patricia. On a day that Patricia and Helen both had the day off. Patricia looked up Helen's address on her map application on her cell phone. Helen's house was only 10 minutes away. Patricia followed the directions and at 9 o'clock a.m., she rang the doorbell at 2370 for Evergreen Avenue. It took Helen a while to answer the door. She looked genuinely surprised, but also confused when she saw Patricia on her doorstep. What are you doing here? How did you get my address? Helen asked. She was still in her pajamas and her hair was a mess. You told me to drop by anytime we both had a day off, so I got your address from our manager. I want to give you a surprise, Patricia said. I was just being polite. You can't just show up at someone's house, Helen said before slamming the door on Patricia's face. Trick or treat, it was Laura's first Halloween in the United States. She had seen many portrayals of the late October holiday on television and in movies. She had to admit she was a little excited and nervous about the day. She was excited to see the costumes worn by kids ringing her doorbell. She was also worried about being scared by the costumes. She had watched too many horror movies. Laura was renting a room in a house. Her landlady asked her if she could help with the candy. Laura happily agreed. The sun was just starting to set when the first group of kids in costumes rang the doorbell. Trick or treat, they said. Enthusiastically, when Laura opened the door, the kids all had open bags. I want a treat, Laura said and grabbed the candy from each of the bag. The landlady came running to the door. No, Laura, you give the kids candy, not taken from them, she explained gently. Thankfully, none of the kids were upset. They just looked confused. The landlady suggested that Laura should go out with some friends to a local community Halloween carnival. She would handle giving out the candy by herself. Laura went to her room to put on her witch costume. She walked to the local recreation center along with Joe and some other friends. The recreation center was decorated with fake spider webs and filled with artificial fog. We're going to egg some houses, Joe told her. She didn't know that throwing eggs was illegal. She just thought it was another Halloween tradition. A few hours later, the landlady opened the door and found Laura accompanied by police. Trick or treat? Laura asked, looking embarrassed. No such thing as free lunch ever since Mary moved to the United States 1 year ago. She often heard the phrase no such thing as free lunch. While she understood this to mean that you can't get something for nothing, she heard other mothers at her child's school talking about the free lunch program. How much does it cost to enroll? Mary asked the secretary at her child's school. The secretary smiled and told Mary that it didn't cost anything except a little bit of time. In order to find out if Mary's child was qualified to get free lunch at school, she had to fill out a form. The form was available in many languages besides English. It asked Mary basic questions like where she lived, how many children she had, and what her annual income was. Filling out the form was easy, and Mary didn't have to include proof of her income. She was worried, though, if the information on the form would be shared with other agencies. The secretary told her that the information was not shared. If Mary made below a certain amount annually, her child could get free lunch not just during the school year, but also even during the summer when there was no school. Mary knew this would help her family. While Mary did work, she only worked part-time. Giving her child money for lunch every day did add up and impact the family budget. After filling out and submitting the form back to the school secretary, Mary had to wait a month or two before finding out if she was qualified. A few weeks after she submitted the form, a letter arrived in the mail. The letter informed her that her child was qualified. The letter also told her that her child could also get free breakfast in school. No smoking for the past week. Elizabeth would come home from work and discover that her apartment smelled like cigarette smoke. She did not know where the smell was coming from. Elizabeth didn't smoke. No one else had the key to her apartment to smoke inside while she was at work. The smell of smoke especially bothered her because she had asthma. One day, Elizabeth stayed home from work because she was expecting a package. When she woke up that morning, the apartment smelled fine at 1 in the afternoon. Elizabeth went into the kitchen to make a sandwich for lunch. That was when she noticed the smell of cigarette smoke. She called the building superintendent. By the time he arrived at Elizabeth's apartment, the whole place smelled like cigarette smoke. The super told Elizabeth he was pretty sure the smoke was coming up, though the vents from her new downstairs neighbor. The new neighbor was a smoker, the super told Elizabeth there was nothing to be done. The building was really old and the vents couldn't be sealed. It was also perfectly legal for the downstairs neighbor to smoke in his apartment. He suggested that Elizabeth buy an air filter and see if that would help. Elizabeth bought an air filter but didn't find it to be enough. Her asthma was getting worse. Her clothes and furniture were beginning to smell like cigarette smoke, too. Elizabeth decided to go downstairs to talk to the neighbor. She was going to ask him not to smoke in his apartment. Elizabeth knocked on the door. When he opened the door, a huge wave of cigarette smoke came out. Elizabeth began coughing violently. The neighbor gave Elizabeth a disgusted look. "Are you trying to get me sick?" the neighbor asked her. Elizabeth couldn't believe what he was saying. "No, but you are," she said. My best friend's name is Joseph Taylor, but he prefers to be called Joe. He does a lot of stupid stuff, and it usually gets him in trouble. The other day, while he was trying to impress some girls, he fell off his skateboard and broke his arm. Joe had to get his arm in a cast, but he told me it was worth it. He had already gotten 3 phone numbers from the girls he was trying to impress. I always love Joe coming over to my house because it makes my day more exciting. After he showed me his arm, Joe asked me if I wanted to go to the mall. "Sure, why not?" I said. I asked my mom for permission and she said yes. When we got to the mall, Joe wanted to get something to eat, so we went to McDonald's. We got to hamburgers and to sodas, and then we went walking around the mall. For some reason, Joe always liked stealing things from the stores at the mall. I never understood why he stole the things he did. For example, that day he stole 3 keychains, 5 pairs of socks, and a t-shirt of a television show that he had never heard of. Joe always said the same thing when he got out of the store. "I love the rush of stealing." I always looked at him, shook my head, and called him an idiot. The worst was yet to come. When we were leaving the mall to go catch the bus, a security guard grabbed Joe and me by the shoulders and told us we couldn't leave. The security guard took us to his office and called our parents. I was worried because I knew my dad would yell at me. Joe, on the other hand, was laughing and was telling me jokes. When our parents showed up to pick us up, Joe looked at me, smiling, and said, See you in a couple of months. I looked at him, shook my head, and called him an idiot. What's good for the goose? Rob Hernandez thought the fuzzy little chick at the pet shop was the cutest thing he had ever seen. He had to buy it. He thought he was buying a baby duck and named his new pet Chaco. Chaco was loved and grew fast. Rob began to notice, however, that Chaco was growing too fast and getting too big. When Chaco made his first sound, Rob couldn't believe his ears. Rob expected a quack, but Chaco honked. Chaco was no duck. Chaco was a goose. Rob didn't reject Chaco, though. He kept him as long as he could. Chaco was not a quiet goose. He made a lot of noise, honking day and night. Rob's neighbors started to complain. Rob didn't want to give Chaco up, but he couldn't risk his neighbors calling the police on him either. Rob had to make a decision. Rob decided to take Chaco to a nearby park that had a lake with other geese. Rob felt sad leaving Chaco, and he was pretty sure his feathered friend felt sad, too. Rob goes twice a week to the park to visit Chaco so that both the goose and the owner are less sad. When Rob goes to visit, Chaco swims across the lake right into Rob's arms. Sometimes, Chaco will even give Rob a little peck, a goose's way of giving a kiss. When Rob goes to visit, he always brings snacks for Chaco. The other geese seemed to be jealous of all the attention Chaco was getting, so now Rob brings enough bread for all the geese to share. Rob and Chaco also play. Rob throws his former pet into the lake. Chaco goes underwater, swims a little, and then returns to the shore so that Rob can throw him in again. A day in the park. Michael Hall always loved playing basketball with his brother Scott. They lived next to a park, and they went to play basketball at the park every day. Michael was a junior at his college, and Scott was a freshman. They both tried out for the college team, but were so nervous during the tryouts that they didn't make it. One day, while they were playing basketball, Michael noticed that a guy was watching them play. When Michael and Scott finished playing, the guy who was watching them went up to Michael. "You guys have some skills," the guy said. Michael finally realized who the man was. It was Charles King, a famous basketball player. Charles told them that he used to play basketball at that park when he was younger. Charles asked them if they played for school or if they had a team with friends. They said they didn't make it into their school's team. "I never made it into my school's basketball team either," Charles said. Charles asked the brothers if they wanted to play a game of 2-on-1. They happily said yes. Charles won, of course, but he told the brothers that they were really good. Charles then told the brothers that he was starting a basketball camp at his old high school, and if they were interested, they could join it for free. The brothers had heard about it and said that they would love to join. "We just have to ask our mother," Scott said. Charles laughed and said, "Of course, you don't want to get Mom mad." The two brothers ran back home, and they told their mom about what had happened at the park. She told them that they could join as long as they kept up with their homework and their classes. The brothers agreed and went back to the park to practice. Winter was approaching. Jason was excited for the coming season. It was his favorite time of a year. He loved the cold weather and snow. Jason lived in New York. During winter, it would snow in New York. He always played in the snow, even as an adult. Jason would gather his family and friends at the park, where they had snowball fights. It was a lot of fun. His favorite holiday, Christmas, occurred in winter. This was another reason why winter was Jason's favorite season. Every year, he bought presents for his friends and family. Jason loved seeing the look on their faces when they unwrapped their Christmas presents. It was better to give than to receive, Jason thought. Jason loved everything about Christmas. He enjoyed caroling. He loved singing Christmas music. He loved kissing his wife under the mistletoe. He loved drinking sweet eggnog. Jason sometimes even dressed up as Santa Claus for fun and entertained his nephews. Winter also came at the end of a year. New Year's Day would come. After Christmas, Jason also loved this holiday. It was a day to celebrate the new year to come while reflecting on the past one. Jason always made New Year's resolutions. Every year he made a new resolution. This year he promised to go skydiving. Last year he promised himself to lose 20 pounds. Jason always kept his New Year's resolution. He lost 20 pounds in 3 months. This year was no exception. He planned to sign up for skydiving lessons in January of next year. Jason could not stop thinking about winter. He could not wait for it to come. It was going to be the best winter yet. Jason needed to wait 5 more months because it was barely mid-July. Paying to win, Tom noticed that every morning when he went to school, his mother would give him a letter to drop in the mailbox on the corner. "Who are you writing to so much?" he asked. "I'm just trying my luck," Tom's mother told him. A few weeks after Tom started mailing out the letters, he noticed that his mother was getting a lot more mail. Some of the mail advertised on the envelope that she might already be a winner. His mother was also getting many more magazines. Some of the magazines were about things his mother didn't even care about, like cats. "Mom, why are you getting so many magazines?" Tom asked her. She told him that she had been entering contests and that part of the process included subscribing to magazines. "It will increase my chances of winning the jackpot," she told him. Soon the family mailbox was filled with more contests, announcements, magazines, and bills. Tom's mother was surprised. She didn't think that checking off the boxes of magazines that looked interesting and affixing stickers to the return forms would cost her. She was spending more and more money and hadn't won anything. She wanted to be like the people in the commercials she saw on television. People bringing balloons and oversized checks surprised those people who entered the contests. Tom read the fine print. The magazines weren't free, and Tom's mother was not increasing her chances of winning anything by subscribing. Tom did some research and found out there had even been lawsuits against the companies running the contests and selling the magazine subscriptions. Tom's mother felt bad. "It pays to win, Mom." "But you can't pay to win," Tom told her. Tom's mother wondered what she was going to do with all these magazines. Water balloon war. It was a hot day in Clarksville. The children in the neighborhood were sweating and wanted to do something refreshing. The pool was closed because they were building something new in it. They thought about what they could do to escape the heat, but they never could agree on doing the same thing. That's when Christopher Baker decided to go to the store. He bought 10 bags of balloons and went to his house to fill them up with water. He invited his two best friends Joseph and Patrick to help him out. By the time they finished, they had 5 buckets of water balloons. They went outside with the buckets, put them in the center of Joseph's lawn, and started throwing them to the children in the neighborhood. At first, the other children were surprised, but then they wanted to get wetter. They all went to the store and bought some balloons for themselves. Christopher and his friends went back into the house to make more balloons. When they get back outside, they got attacked with 10 different water balloons. Christopher and his friends started laughing when they realized where the other boys were. They decided to hide. Christopher gave the orders to his friends. He told Joseph to hide behind his dad's car. He told Patrick to hide behind his mom's car. They each took for water balloons. With them, Christopher told them to wait for his signal, and then they could throw the balloons. Christopher knew where 3 of the boys were hiding, so he went running and attacked them with 5 water balloons. Christopher then ran back to the place where he was hiding, but the boys were coming after him. Christopher yelled out, "Now!" Joseph and Patrick came out of hiding and attacked the boys with their water balloons. The boys went back. Christopher and his friends started laughing. Composting Ron was excited to show his wife Debbie what he had bought at the home improvement store. Debbie, however, was not impressed when she saw the big, black plastic bin. She thought it was a garbage can. "We have a garbage can already. Why did you get another one?" Debbie asked. She seemed annoyed. Ron explained that it was not a garbage can. It was a compost bin. Ron explained that a compost bin was a place where they could put any organic waste, like fallen leaves, grass clippings, and fruit and vegetable peels. "Why can't we just throw that in the trash?" Debbie asked. She really didn't want extra work for herself. Ron explained that it was good for the environment. About 30% of all the garbage in the United States is made up of waste from food and yards. Not only would they produce less garbage, they would also make compost, which was rich soil. It would help Debbie's flowers. She could have the beautiful garden she always dreamed of. Ron explained. That little by little inside the bin, the food scraps and green waste would create a pile. The pile would naturally break down. Where are we keeping this pile? Debbie asked. Ron said the bin would go in the backyard. Debbie wasn't convinced. She was worried about rats and roaches. Ron explained that as long as they didn't put any meat scraps or oily items in the compost bin, then rats wouldn't be a problem. Roaches, however, were a natural part of the materials breaking down. Ron was especially excited about what he bought to put in the compost bin. He pulled out a small box and gave it to Debbie. She opened it and screamed before dropping the box on the floor. The box was filled with worms. Summer job. It was the beginning of summer. David Lopez's dad wanted him to get a summer job. David had just finished school and was looking forward to enjoying his time off school. He wanted to sleep late, he wanted to play video games, and he wanted to spend time with his friends. David's dad decided that he would get a job for David. When he came home, he handed David a uniform for the Burger Hut. David was sad because he didn't want to work at the Burger Hut. He knew all of his friends went there, and he knew that his friends would make fun of him. David knew that his dad was able to get him this job because the owner was his dad as friend. The owner's name is Michael. David didn't really like him that much. David had the first day at work. Everyone that worked at the Burger Hut had to wear a hat. David's hat fell into the oil where they made the fries. Michael had to get it out with a big spoon. After a week had passed by, David seemed to be getting used to working at the Burger Hut. Michael was impressed with how hard David worked and told him he could take a day off. During his day off, David went out with his friends. They went to the park and played some basketball. And then his friends decided to go get something to eat. David asked them where they wanted to go. They said they wanted to go eat at the Burger Hut. David tried to convince them to go somewhere else, but his friends really wanted to go to the Burger Hut. When they got to the Burger Hut, David put on his sweater and his hat. He sat down in the far corner of the restaurant and tried to hide himself from his co-workers and his boss when his friends got their food. They went to sit down with David. Michael came out and saw David. He went up to him and said, "You just can't get enough of this place, huh, David?" Michael chuckled and then left. David's friends took a bite out of their burgers and looked at David. "You work here?" One of David's friends asked. His another friend looked at him and said, "Can you get me a job?" David smiled and nervously said, "I'll try." A night in Las Vegas. Nancy Scott just turned 21 last October. She was excited about finally being able to go to concerts that were strictly 21 and over. She decided that she would go to Las Vegas. For her first concert, Jennifer, Nancy's sister, decided to go along with her because she didn't want her sister to go alone and get lost. Jennifer called her friends Matt and Jake, and they all decided to make the drive to Las Vegas. As they arrived in Las Vegas, they parked their car in the parking lot of the hotel they were staying in. Nancy took a shower, and then Jennifer took one. They got dressed and then met both Matt and Jake in the lobby of the hotel. Nancy was so excited, she asked her sister if she wanted to get a drink. Jennifer agreed and said okay, but only one. Jennifer bought her sister a giant drink that came in a 4-foot-tall cup, and she got the same. Nancy couldn't believe how big the drink was. "It's almost as tall as me," Nancy said. Jennifer laughed and took a drink from her cup. Matt and Jake arrived first at the place where the concert was going to be. They called the sisters and told them where to meet them. Nancy was excited to see the concert because one of her favorite bands was playing. As they got in line to get in, Jennifer went to the restroom. When Jennifer was getting back to her friends and sister, she met one of the members of the band named Jill. Jennifer told Jill about Nancy coming all the way to Las Vegas to see this show, and if she could do something special for her. Jill smiled and said sure. She reached into her purse and gave Jennifer for backstage passes. Jennifer hugged Jill and said thank you. Jennifer ran back to Nancy and told her to close her eyes. When Jennifer told Nancy to open her eyes, she was holding up the backstage passes in front of Nancy. Nancy began jumping up and down with joy. The divorce. It's been 6 months since Jason White's parents were officially divorced. At first, Jason was sad. He thought that it was his fault that his parents had gotten divorced. One day, while Jason was at his dad's new apartment, he asked his dad a question. "Why did you get divorced with Mom, Dad?" Jason asked. His dad didn't want to talk about it. He told Jason that he would understand when he was older. The following day, Jason went back home with his mother. During the car ride, he asked his mother the same question. "Why did you get divorced with Dad, Mom?" Jason asked. She told Jason the same thing his father had told him. Jason didn't understand why they couldn't tell him the reason. He was 10 years old, but he felt like he was still 6. A week had passed since Jason asked his parents the question. Things weren't looking great for his parents. His mom would cry, and his dad would always be mad. Jason began getting angry. With his parents, one day after school, Jason decided to go over to his friend Matt's house. He asked Matt if he could sleep over for a couple of days. Matt said yes, so Jason went to get some clothes from his house before his mom got home. Jason got back to Matt's house. He told Matt not to tell Matt's mom and his mom that he was staying there. He didn't want anyone to know that he was there. Matt agreed. At around midnight, Jason's mom called Matt's mom to ask if Jason had stopped by. As Matt didn't tell his mom, so his mom said no. The following day, Jason saw that the police were looking for him. His mother and father had called the police. Matt began to get worried because he didn't want to lie to the police. He called Jason's parents and told them that Jason was at his house when Jason's parents arrived. At Matt's house, Jason wanted to leave through the window. Matt told him that his parents were worried sick and that he had to go back. His parents came into Matt's room and saw Jason. They ran to him and hugged him. Jason's dad turned to his ex-wife and gave her a big hug and a kiss. Jason felt happy but confused. The girl next door, James Baker, was only 12 years old when his parents decided to move the family to a new town. At first, James was heartbroken because he had to leave his friends behind. His mother told James that it would be okay and that he would make new friends. When James and his family finally arrived at their new home, they decided to go out to meet the neighbors. It was a typical American suburban neighborhood. Every house had a big lawn in the front with a walkway leading up to the door. James felt uncomfortable and he didn't want to meet the neighbors. The first house they went to belonged to an elderly couple. They seemed nice, but they didn't have any kids that were James's age. The next house they visited had bicycles parked by the garage door. So James thought kids of his age might live there. James knocked on the door, and a young girl named Linda answered. James became nervous and he let his mother do the talking. Linda's parents weren't home, but she told James's mother that they would go visit when they got home. Linda smiled at James, said goodbye, and closed the door. As they were walking back to their house next door, James looked back and noticed Linda was looking at him through the window. James looked at her and Linda smiled. When they got home, James went to his new room. He took a look outside his window and noticed that he could see Linda in her room. He couldn't help looking at her. He thought she was the prettiest girl he had ever seen. As James was looking at her, he heard his mother calling, "I'll go downstairs in a moment, Mom," James said as he turned away from the window. When James looked back to Linda, she was staring right at him. James fell down to the floor and said in a whisper, "Oh, no. I hope she didn't see me. Oh, please, please." Linda saw him and laughed. She thought James was cute. The girl next door, James Baker, was only 12 years old when his parents decided to move the family to a new town. At first, James was heartbroken because he had to leave his friends behind. His mother told James that it would be okay and that he would make new friends. When James and his family finally arrived at their new home, they decided to go out to meet the neighbors. It was a typical American suburban neighborhood. Every house had a big lawn in the front with a walkway leading up to the door. James felt uncomfortable and he didn't want to meet the neighbors. The first house they went to belonged to an elderly couple. They seemed nice, but they didn't have any kids that were James's age. The next house they visited had bicycles parked by the garage door. So James thought kids of his age might live there. James knocked on the door, and a young girl named Linda answered. James became nervous and he let his mother do the talking. Linda's parents weren't home, but she told James's mother that they would go visit when they got home. Linda smiled at James, said goodbye, and closed the door. As they were walking back to their house next door, James looked back and noticed Linda was looking at him through the window. James looked at her and Linda smiled. When they got home, James went to his new room. He took a look outside his window and noticed that he could see Linda in her room. He couldn't help looking at her. He thought she was the prettiest girl he had ever seen. As James was looking at her, he heard his mother calling, "I'll go downstairs in a moment, Mom," James said as he turned away from the window. When James looked back to Linda, she was staring right at him. James fell down to the floor and said in a whisper, "Oh, no. I hope she didn't see me. Oh, please, please." Linda saw him and laughed. She thought James was cute. Going out to the movies, Robert Lee and his brothers were excited about the new Godzilla movie that was coming out. The day the movie came out, Robert and his brothers went to the theater early. Robert's brothers wanted to see another movie first, and then they wanted to sneak into Godzilla. Robert didn't mind, because he liked going to the movies. When they got to the theater, Robert bought his brothers popcorn, soda, and some candy. When they got everything, they went to find their seats. Robert's brothers didn't really like the first movie they watched, but they were excited to see Godzilla. When they got out of the first movie, Robert went to get more soda and popcorn because his brothers had finished all of it. Robert's brothers snuck into the theater, and they were waiting for Robert to come back with the snacks. When Robert tried to go back in to see Godzilla, a security guard asked him for his ticket. Robert didn't have one for Godzilla, so the security guard had to kick him out. Robert had to go outside and buy another ticket for Godzilla. He felt embarrassed because he had to stand in the line with the popcorn and soda. The people in line and the people who worked in the ticket booth looked at Robert and found him funny. Robert knew that they were looking at him because they knew he got kicked out for trying to sneak into another movie. His face turned red. He thought about calling his brothers to get out so that they could go home. Robert thought about how his brothers wanted to see the movie too, and so he bought the ticket and went back in. The security guard looked at him again and asked him for his ticket. Robert showed it to him and went into the theater. The security guard laughed. Giving a hand, Jaime, a new immigrant, was attending his daughter's first performance in a school play. His daughter, Carol, was 5 years old. She was a kindergarten student at the local public school. Carol did not have a very big role in the school play. She was playing a rain cloud in a play about the drought in California. Carol had one line. Her line was, "I am sad enough to cry about how dry the state is." Jaime and his wife made sure to arrive early so that they could get a good seat in the auditorium. They secured seats in the front row. Before the show began, the school principal made an introductory speech. The speech was about how hard the students and teachers worked together to make the play possible. At the end of the speech, the principal said, "Let's give the school staff a hand." Jaime, whose English was not very good, stood up when the principal said this. He knew that when people said to give someone a hand, they meant they needed help. Jaime always wanted to help, especially at his daughter's school. Jaime thought maybe they needed help backstage. Jaime's wife put her arm in front of her husband. "Where are you going?" she whispered. "They need a hand," Jaime whispered back. His wife explained that to give someone a hand could also mean to applaud someone. "They don't need help. They just want us to clap," Jaime's wife said. Jaime felt a little embarrassed. He sat back down and began clapping along with the rest of the audience. Jaime thought to himself that someone needed to give the English language a hand. How could one phrase mean two different things? He meant the English language needed help. Going to Disneyland, Ruth Campbell had never gone to Disneyland as a child. She was now 40 years old with 2 children, a boy and girl. The boy's name was Jeff and the girl's name was Carol. When Jeff was 11 and Carol was 13, Ruth decided to take her kids to Disneyland. which would be the first time any of them ever went. When they arrived at Disneyland, Ruth explained to her children that if they got split up, they would meet at the front of the park. The first thing Ruth did when they got inside was looking for Mickey Mouse. She wanted to take pictures with all the characters at Disneyland. She even made a list of the characters she wanted to take pictures with. Her children looked at her and smiled. They saw that their mom was acting like a little girl again. She was giggling every time she took a picture with a character. Her favorite Disney character was Donald Duck, so she kept an eye open for him. When they were in line for a ride, she saw that Donald was taking pictures with people by a restaurant. She told her children, "Look, guys, it's Donald. Hopefully, he is still there when we get out." When they got out of the ride, Donald wasn't there anymore. Ruth told her children that it was okay and that they would bump into him later on. They enjoyed their day at Disneyland until it was time for the park to close. Ruth and her children were looking at the fireworks that they put on every night at Disneyland. She hugged her children and told them she loved them. They hugged her back and continued to watch the show. When they were leaving the park, her children noticed that Donald was taking photos with some other people and their mom hadn't noticed him yet. Carol told her mom that she needed to go to the restroom and asked her mom to wait for her for a moment. While she was waiting for Carol to come back from the restroom, Ruth felt someone poke her on her shoulder. It was Donald Duck with Carol. Ruth began tearing up a bit and hugged both of them. They all took photos with Donald Duck, the last character on Ruth's list. Anthony's first day at Disneyland is also called Magic Kingdom. It is located in Anaheim, California. The park opened in 1955 and was an instant success. When Anthony Martinez was a little boy, his brothers and sisters told him about Disneyland. At first, Anthony didn't know what they meant. He was just too young and would call it Disneyland as he couldn't pronounce it properly. His father had taken his older siblings to the park many times, but that was years ago. Anthony was much younger than his brothers and sisters for a long time. Anthony kept asking his parents to take him to Disneyland, but the feeling eventually wore off. He quit bugging his parents to take him. One day, when Anthony was about 8 years old, a classmate came to school bragging about his weekend at Disneyland. All of a sudden, Anthony wanted to go again. "Please, Mommy, take me to Disneyland." Anthony pleaded to his mom. His dad heard it and immediately told him, "Okay, son, we're going this weekend for sure." Anthony's dad hadn't realized that his youngest child had never been there and felt very bad about it. The weekend came and Anthony was so excited he couldn't keep still. When they got into Disneyland, Anthony marveled at the castles and other attractions. He especially liked the life-sized characters that roamed the park. He grew up watching Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. Now he was taking pictures with them. Anthony was in heaven. The best part of the theme park is the rides. Can we go on the Captain Nemo ride? That question was soon followed by, can we go on the Matterhorn? Soon Anthony had gone on just about every ride. He was overwhelmed by the place. Soon the family was back in their SUV heading back home with Anthony fast asleep. It was the greatest day of his young life, a day he would later call the best day of my life. Richard's father, Richard, grew up in Los Angeles, California, and had a pretty good life. There was food on the table, and he had plenty of clothes to wear. He didn't really have any needs. He went to a good school in a nice area of the city and had many friends. Richard grew up with 3 older sisters who also enjoyed their life in California and had many friends. All this was possible because of their father, Michael. Michael was born into poverty in a small town just outside of Mexico City. When Michael was a boy, he remembered times when there was not enough food to eat or fresh water to drink. Whenever he was thirsty, he would go to the river to collect water. Michael lived in a hut that had no floor. Many times he slept on the dirt with just a blanket between him and the ground. That all changed when, at the age of 17, Michael emigrated to the United States with his family. The first few years were almost as difficult as it was in Mexico, but gradually things began getting better for Michael and his family. When Michael turned 19, he decided to enroll into a community college. His father had always stressed the importance of learning English while they lived in Mexico. That talent was very useful to Michael now. Soon Michael was bringing home excellent report cards. Because of this, he was able to transfer to a university and earned his degree in engineering. Michael got a great job that paid well, which allowed him to move into a better part of town. And to help his parents, too, he soon had a family of his own. When Richard was born, it was the happiest day in Michael's life. Christopher the reporter. When Christopher Lee was a young man, he had a dream to become an English professor. He worked hard at this by first going to a community college after high school, before transferring to the University of California, Los Angeles, at UCLA. Chris earned his bachelor's degree in English, but he still needed his master's degree to teach at college. Chris met George while taking a class at his old community college. George was a news reporter who told Chris how much he enjoyed his job. Chris became very interested in his story. It turned out George was also an English major, but he turned to journalism because he wanted to be published. George said to Chris one day, "Chris, I've known lots of English majors who want to be published, but never got that chance. In journalism, you can get published and get published often." Chris thought about his words and asked him how he became a journalist. George laughed and said, "Start with Journalism 101. Chris took his advice and soon he fell in love with writing in journalism style. Its short, precise method of writing appealed to Chris. Journalists deal only in facts. It is not like English writing. You don't paint pictures in journalism. You report facts. There is a measure of creativity involved with writing in a journalistic style, but it is unlike English." Soon, Chris earned his certificate and went on to earn his master's degree in journalism. He now works for a large daily newspaper. He is very grateful to his old friend George, who introduced him to journalism. He has now been published more than 100 times. George changed the course of Christopher's life. A trip to Hawaii, you're a winner. That's what Helen Green read as she opened an envelope she got in the mail. She couldn't believe it. She had one. Helen's husband Roger came over to see why Helen was screaming and jumping. Helen told Roger, "You're not going to believe it. Your sister entered us in a sweepstakes for a Hawaii vacation, and we won." "We won, Roger." Roger didn't believe it at first, but then he researched it. "Well, I guess we're going to Hawaii, honey," he told Helen. They both started jumping with joy. Helen and Roger arrived at Hawaii and couldn't believe how beautiful everything looked. They had been married for 20 years, but had never had a vacation. After they had checked into their hotel room, they decided to go to the beach. They met a surfer named William, although he liked to be called Will, who was offering free lessons. Seeing that Roger had always wanted to learn how to surf, they decided to go. Will explained to Roger how to paddle the surfboard, and he taught him how to stand up on it. After 2 hours of training in the sand, Will told Roger that they would go out to the water. Roger didn't like that. "Where are we going?" Roger nervously asked. "Over there," said Will. As he pointed to the ocean, he started getting nervous and started breathing heavy. Helen went over to Roger and calmed him down. "They're probably in their honeymoon," people said as they passed Roger and Helen. Roger laughed. He finally calmed down. He went out to the ocean with Will and tried to surf. Every time he tried to get on the surfboard, he ended up falling. When they got back to the land, Helen hugged Roger and kissed him. "You did great, honey." "I love you," Helen said. Roger knew she was lying, but he had never seen Helen smile so greatly. He let it go. "Losing my dog, it was Sunday, the last time I saw my dog. His name is Spot because his whole body is covered with spots. He is a good dog. He never bites and almost never barks. I got Spot when I was around 9 years old. All of my friends knew that Spot was like my best friend. So, when I told everyone that Spot had gotten lost, they all came out trying to help out. We looked for hours. My dad told me that maybe Spot got picked up by a dog catcher, if that was true. Then he would be at the dog pound, which is where they send all the dogs that get lost. My friend Mark told me that they put pictures of all the dogs they find in the street online, so I went online to try. I spent more than an hour checking the online pictures of the dogs and finally found my spot. I started jumping with joy. I went with my mom and dad to pick up Spot. When we got there, he started barking and running in circles all around his cage. I knew he was happy to see us. He had been lost for about 2 weeks. When we got him home, he ran around the backyard and ran directly into his little house my dad and I built for him. He started barking really loudly, which is weird for Spot. As soon as my sister heard Spot, she came running out to try and catch him. He ran around her and then let himself be captured. I think he just wanted to be petted. I knew he was happy to be back home and even happier when I brought out his food. I hope Spot never gets lost again. Superstore. For the past month, Mark King had been receiving flyers in the mail about a new Superstore that was opening up in his neighborhood. The flyers confused him. He had never heard the term Superstore before. Later on, he found out that a Superstore is a large retail store that sells a variety of products, usually at discount prices. Sometimes superstores are also called big box stores. Many times they are chain stores owned by one company. The flyers all had different messages about the Superstore opening. One set of flyers invited him and others to apply for jobs at the store. The jobs paid well and even offered some benefits. Mark thought this was a good thing since he knew many people were looking for work. Another set of flyers included coupons to be used on opening day. The store had many bargains for common items like paper towels, but also for big screen televisions. Mark thought this too was a good thing. It seemed like a good idea to be able to get a variety of things in one place instead of going from one store to another. It would save time and money. Superstores could sell groceries and clothes under one roof. Another set of flyers contradicted the positive messages about the Superstore, though. Some local residents were organizing a protest of the Superstore. The flyer said that the Superstore was bad for the community because it threatened the business of smaller stores in the area. Mark thought about Mr. Hernandez, who owned a small grocery store down the block. That was where Mark bought staple food items like eggs and milk. He didn't want Mr. Hernandez's store to be closed, but he also wanted to save money. Getting a driving license is very important for a 16-year-old. Today was my 16th birthday, and my dad promised to take me to the Department of Motor Vehicles to do my driving test. I passed my written test already, so it was for a road test today. When we got to DMV, I began to get really nervous. I was driving my dad's car, and I didn't want to mess up and crash. My dad looked at me and told me that everything would be fine. I had stayed up all night thinking about how it would go and if I would pass the test. When the driver instructor came out, he told me to get in the car and turn on the lights. I did as I was told. He then told me to turn on the left turn signal and then the right turn signal. They both worked, so it was time to start driving. The instructor had dark sunglasses on, and he didn't say much when we got in the car. The instructor gave me directions to go straight and make a right turn at the next stop sign, which was a couple of blocks away. I did as I was told, and then kept going straight. Then the instructor told me to keep going straight until I reached a street called Marengo and then to turn left. As I drove, I kept looking for Marengo Street and thought I might pass it and the instructor would deduct points from my test. When I finally found Marengo Street, I turned to tell the instructor. That was when I realized that he was asleep. I couldn't believe it. This was an important event in my life, an event that I had been worried about for months. When we finished, he woke up and told me I had done a good job, and that I would be getting my license in about a month. I laughed and thanked him. I went to tell my dad the good news. Woken up by fireworks, a loud boom woke her up. She looked at the clock next to her bed. It was midnight. What was that? She asked her husband, who hadn't been woken up by the sound, so Betty shook him. Another loud boom followed. Then there was a crackling sound. "Oh, that's just fireworks," Betty's husband said. It wasn't the 4th of July, the most common day to hear fireworks. It was just a normal Thursday night in the middle of June. Why would there be fireworks now? Betty asked. Betty and her husband just moved into a new house after their wedding. This was the neighborhood her husband grew up in. He said it was common for people to start setting off fireworks in the summer, even before the Independence Day holiday. The whole summer is a reason for fireworks here, Betty's husband told her. He said that even when it wasn't summer, people set off fireworks for whatever they were celebrating. Maybe someone is having a graduation party or a birthday, Betty's husband told her. He said that sometimes people set off fireworks even when a local sports team won a game. Betty wondered how that was legal. She thought fireworks were illegal to buy and use. Betty's husband told her that it was easy enough for people to buy fireworks. He also told her that different counties in the state had different laws. So people could buy fireworks in one county and use them in a different county, like where they lived. Also, people can legally set off fireworks for holidays besides the 4th of July. Like for Lunar New Year, he added. Betty tried to go back to sleep, but the loud booms and crackles kept going. She decided to get a glass of water and go out into the yard to see the fireworks. The artist, the poor man, and the musician, 3 men, once lived in a small town in Texas. One was a musician, another was an artist, and the other was a poor homeless man. One day, the artist was going to start working on a new sculpture, but didn't have the necessary tools to start. He went downtown and saw a poor homeless man. Because the artist was new in town and got lost, he asked the homeless man where the nearest art supply store was. The homeless man told him that it was the red and white building around the corner. The artist looked at him and said thank you. He gave the homeless man a $10 bill with the words "Pass it forward" written on the bill. The homeless man took the money and said, "God bless you." A few hours had passed, and the homeless man started getting hungry. He walked around in town and saw a young musician playing outside a cafe. The homeless man sat down and started listening to the music played by the musician. A waiter from the cafe came out and told the homeless man that he had to leave because he wasn't buying anything and other people wanted to sit down and enjoy the music. The musician saw this and told the waiter to leave him alone and that he would like to buy the homeless man something to eat. The waiter looked at the musician and said okay. The homeless man thanked the musician. After he finished eating, he took out the $10 bill and gave it to the musician. The homeless man left after the musician had finished playing at the cafe. He decided to go to a local art festival with his girlfriend. As they were walking around and looking at all the different paintings and sculptures, the musician's girlfriend saw a sculpture she liked. It was a young man helping out an older man who had fallen down. She wanted to buy it, but didn't have enough money. The musician told her not to worry. He pulled out $10 and gave it to the artist. As the musician and his girlfriend walked away, the artist looked at the $10 bill and smiled. "Well, look at that. You found your way back home," said the artist. Looking for a job, Donald Turner wanted to get a job. He had graduated from his university with a bachelor's degree in business administration. Since his graduation, he had applied for 20 jobs. Yet no one had called him back. Donald decided to be an accountant 2 years ago because he figured that it would be an easier way to earn money. Although Donald had studied to become an accountant, his real passion was painting. Donald took some art classes at his university. His teacher told him that he had the talent, but needed to commit more to his painting, even though Donald was interested. He decided to play it safe and focus his study on becoming an accountant. He passed his art classes as well as his business classes, all with A's. He was proud of his grades. However, 2 years had passed. Donald still could not find a job. He began getting frustrated. In order to calm himself down, Donald began painting. He would go to apply for jobs in the morning and then come back home and paint. When Donald began feeling really stressed out, he would go out to the park and paint there. One day, when Donald was painting at the park, a man began watching him paint. Donald didn't see the man the whole time he was there. When Donald finished the painting, the man went to talk to him. "You have some real talent," the man said. Donald chuckled and said thanks. The man wanted to know if Donald was selling the painting. Donald was surprised. He didn't think anyone would want to buy his paintings. Donald said yes. And the man offered him $1. $500 for the painting. Donald almost dropped the painting because he couldn't believe it. After Donald sold the painting, he bought art supplies with the money he received. He decided to forget about being an accountant. He had never felt so happy. The evils of technology. Maria Gonzalez didn't like how technology was slowly taking over everyone's life. She always took the bus to school. Whenever she got on the bus, she would notice that more than half of the people were staring down at their phones. Fewer people were having actual conversations with each other. She felt bad. She thought that this was the reason why people had trouble relating to people in the real world. Everyone was living online now. Maria had trouble making new friends because she hated being on social media websites like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. She rarely met new people. She tried going up to people on the bus and starting a conversation, but they always looked at her weirdly. She felt like she was an outsider, and the only one that was not caught in the internet's web of lies. One day, while Maria was walking in the park, she saw a girl walking through the park. The girl wore a long, colorful dress and was always smiling. Maria wanted to talk to this girl. She walked up to the girl and said hello. At first, the girl was startled because she didn't see Maria coming, but then she smiled and said, "Hello, do we know each other?" Maria shook her head and said no. Maria asked her if she wanted to hang out and talk. The girl said sure. Maria and the girl talked for hours. They talked about everything: music, boys, family, food, and their shared distrust of technology. Maria had done something she hadn't done since she was a young girl. She made a new friend in the real world. Family reunion. Paul Martin didn't like going to his family reunion. He didn't know most of them, and he didn't even like the people he did know. Paul had always been a loner. He liked doing things alone. He went to the movies alone. He went to concerts alone. He liked to go eat alone. So, at the family reunion, it was no surprise to see that Paul was sitting alone at a table where no one was sitting at. Occasionally, an aunt or uncle of his would come up to say hello, but none of his cousins ever said hello to him. Paul was fine with it. He didn't care because he didn't like talking to them either. During his last family reunion, Paul decided to play a trick on his cousins. His cousins had been playing Nintendo in his uncle's room. Paul knew how to turn off all the power in the house. He locked the door to his uncle's room and then went to turn off the power. When all the lights turned off, he could hear his cousins begin to yell. They were upset because the game was going really well. When his cousins tried to leave, they realized that the door was locked. They began to yell for help, and Paul started laughing. All of his aunts and uncles were outside enjoying the party, so no one could hear the yells. Paul went back outside and sat down at a table. He was still laughing. An hour passed, and his aunt started looking for her son. When Paul's cousins were finally set free from the room, they started looking for Paul. Because they knew he had locked them in there, Paul wasn't worried. He knew they wouldn't do anything. He looked at them, laughed, and then went back to listen to music. The cousins sat down and got something to eat. They were all mad at Paul. The bartender as a bartender at one of Los Angeles' busiest clubs. Daniel King often saw a lot of weird stuff. During the last party he worked, he saw 5 people throwing up on the dance floor to fights, and a girl losing her top in front of everyone. The weirdest thing that ever happened to Daniel was when a drunken girl asked him to dance. He denied at first, but when she came back for another drink, she dragged him to the dance floor. Girls had dragged Daniel to the dance floor before, but this time was different. The girls that dragged him out before actually knew how to dance, but this girl did not and was drunk. She kept jumping up and down, shaking her body and looking at Daniel straight in the eyes. She was so drunk that she kept bumping into the other people that were dancing. As the music played, the girl kept jumping and dancing. She kept yelling to Daniel that she had to go to the restroom, but he couldn't hear her. She yelled at Daniel once more, and that's when it happened. She had an accident on the dance floor. Some of her urine actually got on Daniel's shoes. After it happened, the girl was so embarrassed that she ran out of the club crying. Daniel couldn't believe what had happened. He told people to move out of the way, while his friend came over to clean up the dance floor. The weird thing about that incident was that the girl came back the next day looking for her cell phone, but she didn't remember Daniel. Daniel wanted to go hide because he thought she would recognize him, but she didn't. Daniel decided that he would never go out to dance with another girl while he was working. A big city and a small town, Edward Allen always hated living in Los Angeles. Everything was too expensive, traffic was always bad, people were not friendly, it was always crowded. Edward never wanted to live in a big city. He always wanted to live somewhere in the country, in a small town where everyone knew everyone. It was a dream that he was dedicated to achieving. The day after his 26th birthday, he called his friend Lisa, who had moved to a small town in Iowa. He asked her how it was like over there. She told him that he would love it. It's quiet and peaceful. People are friendly. Edward made up his mind he was going to move to this little town. He sat down with his mom and dad and told them what he was planning on doing. They supported his decision and helped him pack his things. He would leave in a week. Lisa had helped Edward get a job where she worked, and she told Edward he could stay with her and her roommate until he got back on his feet. Edward was grateful. When he showed up, he immediately started working. He liked his job, but he found it a bit boring at times. He was a waiter at a cafe. He liked the pie at the restaurant, so it wasn't all bad. After he had been working for 2 months, he told Lisa that he couldn't handle it anymore. He wanted to go back to the city. Lisa laughed and said, "You have always hated the city, but now you're running back to it? I don't get you, Edward." Edward didn't think living in a small town would be so boring. "The boredom alone will drive me insane, Lisa," Edward said as he started packing his things. The last drink, Karen and Betty Robinson were out celebrating their birthdays. They were identical twins and had just turned 30. They went out to a baseball game with a couple of friends. They all bought themselves beer and each drank 8 beers. Karen couldn't drink as much as Betty could, so she had gotten drunk by the 5th beer. Karen and Betty knew that they were going to be drinking, so they decided to take the bus to the game. Their friends all came on the bus as well. When it was time to go home, Karen and Betty got back on the bus with their friends. They got to Union Station and got off to catch their train home. They said bye to their friends and went to catch the train. People looked at them weird because they could tell that they were drunk. When they were on the train, Karen began to feel sick. Betty looked at her and started to laugh. Karen started to vomit, but she stopped herself. She got out of the train and went running to the bathroom to finish vomiting. When they got home, Betty told Karen to drink another beer to calm her stomach. Karen agreed and drank it. It calmed her down, and then she fell asleep. The next day, Karen and Betty woke up sick. They couldn't believe how drunk they had gotten. They both felt terrible. Their stomachs hurt, their heads hurt, they both felt dizzy. When Betty got to work, she found a closet and fell asleep. When Karen got to work, she went to the restroom and threw up when they both got out of work. They promised themselves that they wouldn't drink like that ever again.